The Muppets have arrived at the Disney MGM Studios theme park. Meet Kermit, Fozzie Bear, Miss Piggy, and all your Muppet favorites as they come to permanently leave their mark in this spectacular world of glitz and glamour.
Hey, everybody, it's time to do the show.
Starring what?
Here come the Muppets, only at the Disney MGM Studios theme park.
Did you know that the Muppets originally came to Disney MGM Studios as a stage show in 1990? You probably clicked on this video because you wanted to hear my thoughts about MuppetVision 3D being replaced. And yeah, I'll cover that. But the main premise behind this video is documenting the history of the Muppets in the parks more broadly, and now, among their removal, a discussion of how Disney never really did them justice. In fact, while MuppetVision 3D might be one of the best attractions in the park, it was originally part of a larger plan that included an entire land and ride, and sadly, this dream died with Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets. When Disney MGM Studios opened in 1989, it had, from the beginning, been conceived as a half-day park, with a large focus on taking you behind the scenes to experience movie-making magic. Opening with Just the Great Movie Ride, which celebrated genre-defining films, and the Backstage Studio Tour, which originally opened with an extensive walking portion in addition to the tram, the park really had very little else to do other than a few shows. This would change quickly with the addition of the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular in August and Star Tours in December, but until the opening of the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror and Sunset Boulevard in 1994, the park was incredibly underbuilt by today's standards. There were many expansions and rides planned that never made it past the idea stage, which included a ride called Dick Tracy's Crime Stoppers, a Roger Rabbit-themed Toontown, which became the ride and land in Disneyland, and of course, an entire Muppet studio that would have added greatly to the park and probably would have changed its creative direction long term. However, the Muppets did get a lot farther than the other projects, and even made it into multiple attractions, some of which I didn't know about outside of MuppetVision 3D. So today, I'd like to talk about the legacy of the Muppets in Disney parks, and how beyond MuppetVision 3D, which is legitimately one of the funniest theme park shows ever created, Disney has largely failed this franchise, whether through the strange temporary stage shows, the underwhelming land that was thrown together with the demolition of the streets of America, or the now announced closure of the show, a classic, well-loved attraction in a park that otherwise feels desperately underbuilt even today. So please leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't, and join me today as we explore the disappointing history of how Disney has let the Muppets down, when they have so much potential for so much more. To my surprise when researching this video, I didn't realize that Disney MGM actually had other Muppet attractions other than MuppetVision, and so in June of 1990, in the indoor stage where you might know Voyage of the Little Mermaid from, the park debuted Here Come the Muppets live on stage. Utilizing constant performers, the show begins with Kermit wandering around until he gets a video call from Mickey, who asks how the show is going. Since none of the other Muppets have showed up, Kermit says it's going great, and gets the audience to clap and cheer, but trying to recover the show and contact the other Muppets, he makes a call to Ernestine the telephone operator from the NBC show Laugh-In, which connects him with the different Muppets. He first contacts Miss Piggy, who lies about being in a busy meeting with Disney executives before being outed by pointing out that she's on a video call, and from here, Kermit then calls Fozzie Bear, who in a panic, claims that he can't make it to the show because he's lost. Kermit then asks him to turn around and just walk through the green door, transitioning into another costumed character on stage. Kermit then asks him where everyone else is, to which Fozzie claims that they're on the monorail. With Kermit replying that the monorail doesn't come to this park, it suddenly bursts through the curtain, revealing Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem. Kermit tells them to go get ready for the finale, as Bean and Gonzo come out on stage without explanation, and from here, the characters break into a vaudeville number that features Fozzie. After a bit of music and poorly written jokes, the next act is introduced as Miss Piggy rises out of the stage and sings Personality. After this 2-minute song, which results in the other characters covering their ears and falling over to her shrill finale, the curtain closes and Dr. Teeth comes out, telling Kermit that they'll need to delay their act because Animal has apparently eaten one of their amps. Stalling, Kermit sits and sings a song titled Being Green as images of trees and plants play on the screen behind. After Gonzo, Fozzie, and Bean join in, the song concludes and the Electric Mayhem take the stage to perform Heart of Rock and Roll. At the conclusion of the song, the other characters come back out for a final performance of Shout, where, after another 2-minute segment, the curtain closes to conclude the show as the characters are heard comedically leaving the stage. Here Comes the Muppets certainly wasn't a bad show, and if you actually watch through it, I do think it's more interesting than just listening to me describe how it plays out. However, while it's mildly interesting, it was probably worth experiencing at least once when it existed. I don't think it's an attraction that had repeat entertainment value. While Jim Henson and other actors did provide pre-recorded lines for the characters, and the iconic Muppets humor was present to a minimal degree, the show did just exist as mostly a series of songs. Again, not necessarily a bad show, but one that felt temporary and that failed to do the Muppet characters justice, when we've seen that with the next attraction, they can offer so much more. When Disney MGM Studios opened, the tram portion of the backstage studio tour used to bring people through a street of New York City facades, known appropriately as New York Street. However, because the footprint of the park was incredibly small, the tram stopped driving through here in 1991 with the opening of MuppetVision 3D, which, in addition to the attraction, included a new small area that connected to New York Street to create a backlot-themed land called the Streets of America. In front of MuppetVision, the courtyard contained an elaborate fountain with a spinning Miss Piggy as the centerpiece, and down below, other metal casts of various Muppet characters were posed as if producing a film, since the movie-making theme was so integral to the early park. Looking at the facade of the building, the original sign featured Kermit in front of a clapperboard to reinforce the movie-making theme, and up on the tower to the right of the entrance, a Kermit hot air balloon sat as an iconic landmark to draw people to the area. Entering inside, the short queue is themed as production offices for Muppet films, and just inside the doorway on the right, you can look into the security office. It's a small, intimately themed alcove that most people would just pass right on by, but reading the hanging sign, which states the security will be back in 5 minutes and that the key is under the mat, you'll be rewarded for actually pursuing your curiosity. Indeed, if you actually check under the mat, there is a key embedded into the floor, which is just one of those classic Eisner-era details that you just won't see from Disney Imagineering today. Turning back to look into the hallway, it's small but has some funny designations on the doors, including a meta joke for the Department of Artificial Reality, which states that the door isn't real, because, well, obviously, it's a facade. Walking further into the building, you grab your 3D glasses and emerge out into a large pre-show chamber, which is decorated as prop storage. Walking around and exploring, you'll encounter iconic props and gags from the Muppets. I'm not too familiar with the Muppets outside of a few films, which I've really enjoyed, but it's my understanding that this area is pretty rewarding if you're a big fan of the franchise. The actual pre-show itself is presented across 3 sets of televisions that hang from the ceiling and blocks across the room, and of any ride pre-show anywhere, I think this may be the longest, as it runs around 13 minutes. The pre-show entails a series of acts and gags that are performed from a variety of Muppets characters as they're getting ready to present the show, and while interesting, it would be tedious to cover every single element that occurs. The pre-show was mostly designed to be entered by crowds at any point over a 15-minute period before the next show, and so while entertaining, its exposition doesn't really become important until the last 3 or 4 minutes. Once led into the theater, which is designed in a classic West End or Broadway style for the premiere of MuppetVision 3D, it begins with the animatronic figures of Statler and Waldorf heckling the audience from the balcony on the right, which is a fun surprise for those who haven't seen the show. After a spiel from the cast member who begins the show, an animatronic penguin orchestra rises out of the pit and begins to play the Muppets theme as the curtains pull back to reveal the production offices. Gonzo, who is playing with the 3D sign, opens the door and encounters Kermit, who then turns to the audience and welcomes them to MuppetVision 3D. Walking around the facility, Kermit provides exposition on how they developed 3D effects for the film, and comedically introduces various characters that will have acts later on in the show. After an encounter with Fozzie Bear, who delights the audience with quote, cheap 3D tricks, Kermit walks over to the lab with Dr. Honeydew and Beaker, who are developing a new 3D character. By turning on their machine, they produce Waldo, the spirit of 3D. But after shutting it down, and with Waldo failing to have returned after annoying the audience, Beaker attempts to blow up Waldo with air for a cartoon explosion, which backfires as Waldo multiplies into dozens of figures that move around the theater through a projection effect. Panicking, Dr. Honeydew and Beaker activate the vacuum Muppet, which successfully sucks up the Waldos, but also the entire screen, as a single Waldo escapes from the film and into the theater. He turns into a taxi to escape off-screen, and Kermit reappears back in the production offices and tries to continue the tour, but is interrupted by a 3D flying pie saucer that hits Fozzie in the face. Kermit then introduces the first act, a musical performance from Miss Piggy, and the film transitions to a set in the wilderness as the Penguin Orchestra reappears and Statler and Waldorf start making snide comments about Miss Piggy. After it's revealed that the flying butterfly effect is being orchestrated by Bean Bunny, he gets close to Miss Piggy, who kicks him into the bushes. Returning with a bee on the end of a wire, Miss Piggy hits the effect with a fly swatter, and Bean transitions to blowing bubbles, which results in the actual theater being filled with a bubble effect. After losing it from the interruptions, Miss Piggy goes off on Bean, who, in his disappointment, hands her the rope for the unexpected water ski finale, which results in her being comedically dragged off into the water. Suddenly, Sam Eagle appears and berates Bean for ruining the act, and in his disappointment, Bean opens the set and exits the film, where he encounters Waldo, who has been trying to find his way out of the void. Gonzo runs onto the screen and asks Bean where he's going, who replies that he's been fired and he's going away forever. Gonzo then asks him to get him a sandwich while he's out, before realizing that Bean said that he was leaving. Running off screen in a panic, it's dark for a moment before Sweetums walks by and aims a paddle ball at the audience. Fozzie walks into frame and compliments his neat 3D effect, but Kermit and Gonzo reappear, with Gonzo exclaiming that Bean ran away and that they need to find him. Characters and flashlights begin moving around on screen as lights from the roof of the theater begin searching among the audience. During this segment, an actual actor in a Sweetums costume comes out into the audience looking for Bean and searches the audience while Statler and Waldorf banter from above. Asking if anyone has seen Bean, Sweetums discovers him in the left side balcony as an animatronic figure of Bean sniffles that he's running away because no one would allow him to help in the film. Waldo reappears among the other Muppets back on screen, and they convince Bean to stay in the film, allowing him to set off the fireworks during Sam Eagle's finale. Transitioning into the final act, which is titled A Salute to All Nations but Mostly America, which Sam Eagle needed to reduce from 3 hours and down to 90 seconds, the performance begins with musicians designed to resemble the dolls from It's a Small World. Dressed in colonial military outfits, they begin playing through a series of national themes from various countries before a flag bearer accidentally knocks a sousaphone onto one of the dolls' heads. Sam angrily walks into the performance to set the doll back into place, as the piece transitions to the 1812 overture among cannon and musket fire, which starts to cause chaos. Sam yells for Bean to set off the fireworks as the music transitions to the Stars and Stripes Forever, and with fireworks erupting on screen, they become a physical effect in the theater, which is achieved through LED lights embedded in the ceiling. Zooming out from the fireworks, the screen reveals Miss Piggy dressed up as the Statue of Liberty, like with the fountain outside, and among the chaos of the Small World dolls running into each other and setting off weapons, Waldo circles around Miss Piggy as a fireworks rocket and drops her dress to reveal her bloomers. A fire then breaks out in the orchestra pit as Sweetums comes on screen and yells to stop the movie, and running off and entering the theater as the costume performer again, he brings out a water bucket and dumps the water onto the penguins. The chaos continues as the penguins re-emerge from the pit with a lit cannon and fire at the projector in the back, which is being run by the Swedish chef, destroying the film. After the film reel falls off, Waldo reappears in front of the screen and becomes a target for the chef, who appears as an animatronic and retaliates by firing a blunderbuss. Moving around the screen in the form of a target, Waldo's eyes grow wide in panic as the chef brings out a cannon, where, on firing, a hole is blown in the screen and more broadly in the theater, which reveals damage through a lighting and smoke effect. With Sweetums running back out into the audience to ask them if they're okay, a fire truck backs into the wall of the damaged building, and a ladder extends with Kermit sitting on the end. Apologizing for some slight technical difficulties, Kermit wishes you a good rest of the day as the fire truck begins pulling out back into the park, and as the curtains close, Waldo reappears, trying to escape by disguising himself as Mickey, which concludes the show as he is sucked by a vacuum back behind the curtain. If you haven't seen MuppetVision 3D, then it's a far funnier attraction than how I just described it, that's full of a lot of subtle jokes and humor that might be missed among the chaos, which, in my opinion, leads to a lot of attraction repeatability. The humor is also incredibly meta, with its spoof of 3D being a central element, and the physical effects, animatronics, and even the Sweetums actor makes this film almost impossible to really convey the full effect of unless you're actually sitting in the theater. While the attraction did open in 1991 in Disney MGM Studios, it also ran from 2001 through 2014 in Disney California Adventure off of the Hollywood Pictures backlot. While it's unfortunate that the show is gone there, it's even more unfortunate that it's leaving Hollywood Studios soon too, as this was the last Muppets project that Jim Henson worked on and is historically significant for that reason. In May of 1990, Jim Henson passed away suddenly from organ failure as a result of strep throat that was unfortunately diagnosed too late. MuppetVision 3D was finished for Disney by famous puppeteer Frank Oz, and while the attraction was a fantastic addition to Disney MGM Studios, it was the end of more ambitious plans that had been designed between Henson and Disney. A short 1990 segment from Dateline Walt Disney World reveals more information about what these future plans would have been.
And the Muppet Studios with a MuppetVision 3D movie and the Muppets Movie Ride.
It'll be a backstage ride of explaining how movies are shot. And it's almost, but all the information is wrong.
MuppetVision 3D was the start of an area that would have been known as Muppet Studios, and if you look at the concept art, you may recognize that much of this was actually built. However, it was incorporated into the streets of America with a much more broad backlight and soundstage theme instead, because of disagreements between Disney and the Henson Company after Jim's passing, with it appearing that this area would later become Muppet Studios with additional attractions. From concept art and rumors that have floated around, it's been surmised that there would have been an interactive show called the Swedish Chef's Cooking School, which sat viewers down in a theater for an interactive and comedic experience with the Swedish chef himself. Muppet Studios would have also included a restaurant named the Great Gonzo's Pizza Pandemonium Parlor, which invited park guests in to dine among costumes and props used in the Muppets films. However, since the restaurant was run by Gonzo and other Muppets, explosions would often come from the kitchen, resulting in the doors blowing open and chicken feathers flying out, and up in the rafters above, there was an illusion of food being delivered by Rizzo and other animatronic rats that moved among the rafters. The restaurant was built and actually opened as the generically titled Studio Pizzeria, but 3 months later, it was rebranded as Mama Melrose's Restaurant Italiano. Inside, its designs evoke the feeling of a New York Italian restaurant, but as you look among the walls, you can see that it's decorated with photos and film props that evoke the idea that it's part of the film studio to fit in with the streets of America. However, in addition to the New York aesthetic that was conceived for the Pandemonium Parlor, the rafters where the animatronic rats would have traveled were put into place, and it's even been reported as a rumor that the track system for the effect was even installed. It appears that Disney was just waiting for negotiations with the Henson Company to go their way to retheme the restaurant to the Muppets, but obviously that never happened, and the restaurant has remained Mama Melrose's up through today and until its closure on May 10, 2025. It's a really interesting space, not just because of its Muppet history, but because it's an almost untouched historical relic of early Disney MGM Studios. Although be warned, if you want to experience the restaurant one last time before it closes, the food is genuinely awful and exorbitantly priced for its extremely bland quality. The biggest loss for Muppet Studios was the never-produced Great Muppet Movie Ride, which would have been located in the back of this area and was itself a spoof of the actual Great Movie Ride in the Chinese theater. However, while the park's anchor attraction took you through genre-defining films and directly immersed you into iconic scenes, the Muppet version was instead about going behind the film scenes into actual production for a Muppets movie. Sitting alongside figures of Statler and Waldorf, riders would have traveled through various sets as scenes from a Muppet movie were filmed, and as Jim Henson stated, all of the information is wrong. Scenes in the ride would have included a spoof of Universal's Frankenstein, an interpretation of Peter Pan with the Muppets swinging around on wires, and a chaotic jungle scene with Kermit dressed up as Indiana Jones as other Muppets are sucked down a dangerous waterfall. Another large scene would have been the production of Pigs in Space, an iconic sketch from The Muppet Show. all of the ideas for Muppet Studios really make me wish what could have been included in this park, but the Great Muppet Movie Ride seems like the largest missed opportunity. It would have probably become a well-loved classic e-ticket. However, MuppetVision 3D was not actually the last attraction to come to this park, as despite Here Come the Muppets live on stage closing in September of 1991, it was followed 2 weeks later by another live stage show, Muppets on Location, Days of Swine and Roses. Running through January of 1994 and taking place just outside of the MuppetVision 3D theater, this show was located on an outside stage and first introduces Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem. Other Muppets come out on stage announcing that they're making a movie and wrangle the audience into being active participants, but despite being a 25-minute show, it was really nothing more than a series of musical acts that were loosely tied to the idea that a musical was being filmed. While somewhat entertaining, the show just didn't have much in the way of a narrative, and so I lumped this into the category of Disney letting down the Muppets franchise again, as this show just wasn't very interesting outside of an initial viewing. So that's the end of the Muppets then, right? Well, not exactly, because the future of the franchise in the parks has been quite weird. With Disney having announced the removal of the tram tour and other elements of Hollywood studios for the introduction of Galaxy's Edge, the streets of America became a target for demolition, and in April 2016, they were closed. While it appeared that MuppetVision 3D would stay open, an unexpected turn of events resulted in the messy Muppets area that has now existed from 2017 and up through 2025. It was rumored that while the original plan was to demolish the entirety of the Streets of America facades, an unexpected issue resulted in their partial preservation, as it was discovered that the facades were connected to and important to the structural integrity of the sci-fi dine-in. Because this was the case, the north side of the New York facade was repainted and redecorated to convey a California aesthetic, and the new street was named to Grand Avenue, leading into a Los Angeles tunnel that transitions into Galaxy's Edge. While technically part of Grand Avenue, the Muppets courtyard was also renamed to Grand Park, retaining its New York aesthetic and slightly retheming the area to be more focused on the Muppets. Unfortunately, the spinning Miss Piggy fountain was renovated to be static, and certain figures were removed and replaced with rats in the water, which, while amusing, is very much an inferior version of the fountain. The Kermit balloon from MuppetVision was also removed so that it wouldn't interfere with sightlines in Galaxy's Edge, and the sign for the attraction was replaced with a theater marquee, which isn't as exciting as the previous sign, but is still an appropriate fit for the new area, so I do feel neutral about this change. With the Streets of America gone, Grand Park became a loop that ended at the exit of MuppetVision, and up until 2020, the Studio One Company store also stayed open, which is themed as a soundstage in the back of the area, with Muppets decoration on the exterior. Inside, it was filled with props and Easter eggs related to the Muppets, while also selling Muppets merch. But after the 2020 shutdown, this space never reopened with the park as a store, and was only used for the Jollywood Nights event in 2024. Despite Grand Park essentially becoming a Muppets mini-land, Mama Melrose stayed exactly as it was, and the nearby Christmas shop encountered minimal changes as well. What helped to turn Grand Park into a Muppets land was the retheme of the nearby Toy Story Pizza Planet arcade, where by removing the Toy Story theming, the quick service restaurant reopened as Pizza Rizzo. Continuing the Italian New York theme of the area, Pizza Rizzo kind of revives the idea of Gonzo's Pandemonium Pizza Parlor, where instead of having rats delivering pizza and food up in the rafters, this is now just a pizza restaurant run by Rizzo. It's kind of whatever, and you can see that Disney put very little effort into theming this area, probably because they knew they wanted to get rid of the Muppets not too far into the future. That's not to say that it's not interesting, and I know there are people who love the theming and think it's underappreciated, but it lacks the depth of something like Columbia Harbor House or Restaurantosaurus. Walking into the ordering area, you'll see photos of a kid's baseball team with one of Rizzo's relatives hidden in the photo, where if you search for them, you'll also spot Muppets in other photographs around the restaurant. There's also a display case with Pizza Rizzo merch, which you can't buy, but is part of the theming, and just past this, there's a plaque for the Pizza Eating Contest Hall of Fame, and a display for Employee of the Month featuring a Muppet rat. Down on the first floor of the restaurant, the walls have Muppet Easter eggs, but it's mostly just photos of New York eateries and iconic landmarks. Moving upstairs, the second floor is slightly more interesting, with one seating area themed to a banquet hall where a wedding is taking place, but otherwise, the room is only lightly themed, and the rest of this floor is mostly just decorations on the walls that relate to New York City. This floor does seem to have more Muppets references though, as there is a bulletin board display that features specific Muppets, and in the back, there are framed caricatures of the various Muppets characters, but otherwise, Pizza Rizzo is pretty bland in terms of theming. It's clear that Disney just did a quick and cheap renovation of their restaurant to implement a light Muppets theme without trying to put too much money or effort into it. And while it's kind of neat to see the original pizza parlor concept get revived, it just isn't nearly as interesting as the fully developed idea would have been. Speaking more broadly about Grand Park, I guess that while I kind of think of it as a Muppets Miniland, the only real change made from the streets of America was just the introduction of Pizza Rizzo. The Studio One Company store made very few changes, and the Christmas store and Mama Melrose's have essentially stayed untouched, stuck in time from an earlier era of Disney MGM Studios. While I like the idea of a Muppets Land, it's clear that Disney just didn't even know what to do here, and so it makes sense to me that it's going away to be replaced with Monsters Inc. If you haven't looked too closely at the concept art for the Monsters Inc. Monstropolis that is replacing Grand Park, then let me just point out that most of the buildings are still staying intact. It appears that just the Studio One Company store building is being completely demolished, which is actually a pretty smart idea considering how strange and awkward the layout of the area currently is, and where the streets of America used to extend, a Monsters Inc. Laugh Factory door coaster will be contained inside a new building. It also appears that the MuppetVision Theater will continue to stand, although Disney has not announced what will replace it, and the other shops and buildings will be rethemed to fit into Monstropolis, which, as much as I find the old relics of Disney MGM Studios interesting, it'll be an improvement to put something else into these buildings. My only real issue with Monstropolis is the removal of MuppetVision, which, according to the Disney Parks blog, the company is looking into preserving it in some fashion. It's not clear what this entails, or if preserving it simply means putting the film on Disney+, but imagine, if you will, that there's a world where Disney was still creatively interesting, and from there, I can see the show returning to the park in a new Muppets area. In fact, Disney did announce that Rock and Roller Coaster is being rethemed to the Muppets, with the concept art revealing Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem, as well as Kermit and Miss Piggy. While I'm a bit concerned that the writing and dialogue for the retheme may not really feel like the Muppets, at least the franchise is still staying in the park, which leaves a lot of future potential. I also think that it's a really good retheme idea because Aerosmith definitely had to go at some point, and if they were replaced with another band or artist, absolutely nobody would be happy with the new choice. The Muppets are actually a pretty clever workaround that still allows the coaster to be focused on music, so I'm optimistic for Disney to be making a change for once. What's also important about this retheme is how it potentially opens up this area of the park for future expansion too, as right next to the attraction, the former building for the Lightning McQueen's Racing Academy could be future expansion space for another Muppets attraction too. Should MuppetVision 3D be put into the space to create a small Muppets land in this area of the park? I doubt that Disney intends to actually do that, and since the MuppetVision Theater is so specifically designed for the effects in the show, I don't know if it's even possible to move MuppetVision into a different building like this. Still, I can imagine a revived Muppet Studio with the new Rock and Roller Coaster, a restored MuppetVision 3D, and other attractions and a restaurant doing well here, which, considering how underbuilt Hollywood Studios continues to be, this would do a lot to add very needed capacity to the park. Do I think that Disney would actually do something else with the area though? I doubt it, but you never know what might come in the future. To finish up the video, I did also say that I was covering the Muppets in the Disney parks and not just Disney MGM Studios, so I should quickly mention Muppet Mobile Lab. Featuring Dr. Bunsen Honeydew and Beaker, the Mobile Lab was a remote control character that would interact and talk with park guests as a small special effects show played out. The premise of the show had Dr. Honeydew attempting to convince Beaker not to leave the profession of science as he proceeded to move through a series of comedic gags. And overall, it was an interesting and somewhat funny show. It first premiered in the mid-aughts at California Adventure, but eventually made its way to both Epcot and Hong Kong Disneyland before being retired in 2016. The other Muppets attraction, which premiered in the Magic Kingdom, was titled The Muppets Present Great Moments in American History, which ran in Liberty Square from 2016 and up through 2020. There were two versions of the show that covered either the story of the Declaration of Independence or the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, but along with Sam Eagle, other iconic Muppets would appear and tell these stories in a comedic way. I thought it was a pretty clever addition to Liberty Square, and it's unfortunate that Disney discontinued the show because it was relatively funny while also being somewhat educational. On another thematically related note, the last Muppets addition to the parks was in 2020, when the Liberty Inn quick service restaurant in the American Pavilion at Epcot was replaced with the Regal Eagle Smokehouse. There's not much to say about this other than it's themed to Sam Eagle hosting a barbecue competition among the other Muppets, which you can see in framed pictures up on the walls. But the theming is so subtle that you couldn't be blamed for not knowing that it even had a Muppets theme. So, has Disney ever really done the Muppets justice, specifically in the parks? I mean, I do like MuppetVision 3D quite a lot, and I'm very interested to see the new Muppets retheme of Rock and Roller Coaster, but otherwise, the franchise seems to have just been a lot of missed potential. Between the fun but minimal presence of recent shows like Muppet Mobile Lab and Great Moments, to the forgettable stage shows of early Disney MGM, and now to the removal of MuppetVision, which I don't think will ever return, it's frustrating to see so many missed opportunities. Walking around the former streets of America, you can see how ready Disney was to create an entire Muppet Studios land that fell through a negotiation, and if the Great Muppet Movie Ride had been built, I'm positive that it would have been considered one of Disney's absolutely untouchable classics, and may have completely changed the direction of the future Hollywood studios. All I can feel is disappointment, especially since MuppetVision 3D is one of the very few reasons I even want to visit the park any longer, but since it's going away, I thought this was an interesting opportunity to speak about all things Muppets in the Disney parks. If you're disappointed like I am, please let me know what you think that Disney should be doing with the Muppets, and if you enjoyed the video, please go ahead and leave a like if you haven't yet done so. As always, if you have not yet subscribed and hit the bell notification yet either, you can do so now to be alerted to new videos as they're released.